I'm really excited about our next session. It is titled Accelerate ML Adoption by Addressing Hidden Needs. Please join me in welcoming to the stage AI Platform Product Manager at Wells Fargo, Max Williams. Max, you can come up and join us on the stage now. Awesome. Welcome, Max. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks.
For our audience, we'll have live Q&A with Max after his talk. So please post your questions in the Zoom Q&A and we'll get to those afterwards. Max, I'll hand the stage to you.
Thank you. Let me just get my slides queued up here. All right, I hope folks can see okay. But
Max,
I'm hoping
this is in speaker view. Can we switch to presentation view?
Yes, thanks. Is that better?
We can still see both slides.
Sorry. How about that? Is that better?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm hoping that this sort of resonates with a bit of a mixed audience, both AI machine learning practitioners and executive sponsors. What I'll be talking about is why we're excited about data-centric AI and how it can help us address some hidden needs that will really help us accelerate AI machine learning adoption. So a bit of a spoiler alert here, but I'll be talking about how data-centric AI can help us address the unmet needs of a key persona, which is our CFO. Let's kind of set the stage a little bit, talk about some of the strategic investment that we see generally in the space. And despite all that strategic investment, how some lower than expected returns can really lead to executive hesitation. We try to unravel that just a little bit and look at maybe one potential key driver of those lower than expected returns, which would be the cost structure. We do see that cost structure kind of falling pretty dramatically. So we'll look at some other areas as maybe likely factors in, again, that lower than expected ROI and what we can do about it, how data-centric AI helps us improve the ROI profile there. Okay, so this persona, our CFO, I think data-centric AI really helps us meet some unaddressed needs for CFOs or business sponsors. And I hope through the course of the discussion here, we can see how data-centric AI really helps us do that. Ultimately, I think a key way in which it helps us improve is assessing AI machine learning durability. And by doing that, we can then improve the return on investment that we see in ROI, which ultimately helps us facilitate adoption. As an AI/ML practitioner, maybe that means more AI/ML use cases you're able to support or launch. And as a business executive or sponsor, it means your AI transformation kind of gains steam and you see a better ROI profile out of that. Okay, so just to set the stage, tons of strategic investment in AI machine learning. I'm sure that's not a surprise for anyone who's participating in the event here today. But on the left-hand side, we see global corporate investment in AI machine learning. So this includes things like mergers and acquisitions, private investment, IPOs, some of the most strategic things that an enterprise can engage in. We see the trend here kind of speaking for itself. And I'm sure the 2022, 2023 figures will kind of continue this trend. So that's kind of at the macro level. On the micro level, we see research on the right-hand side from McKinsey and Deloitte. They've interviewed managers and leadership teams within companies, and they all say even at that level where they're just looking to grow and build new use cases, a majority of those respondents expect to increase the number of AI machine learning use cases that they're launching in the upcoming years. So just highlighting that kind of on a macro level, we see a lot of investment, and even at a micro level, we see a lot of investment. So no shortage of strategic investment in AI machine learning. However, there's a bit of a catch. So we don't yet see AI machine learning generating, attractive return on investment just yet. So on the left-hand side, we see this sort of illustrative distribution of return on investment for AI use cases. This dashed line in the middle, the hurdle rate. If you're maybe not familiar with this, your CFOs or your business sponsors are looking for essentially more of our use cases to fall onto the right of that hurdle rate, which means it's going to drive meaningful results for the business. So if we are expecting a less than appealing return on AI machine learning, we expect to see something like we've got here in red. And again, just highlighting some anecdotes from the McKinsey study. They say that about 75% of respondents indicated that less than 5% of their operating profits were attributable to AI machine learning, which is relatively stable across several years. So we see some anecdotes kind of supporting this and just highlighting that what we really want to see to drive adoption is something like this in purple, where a majority of our AI machine learning use cases are falling well above this hurdle rate. That ought to ensure that we're delivering substantial business value as an AI machine learning practitioner for our business. Okay, so let's unravel this a little bit and see what might one likely factor in this under appealing ROI story be. So here on the left-hand side, we see an illustrative marginal cost curve. So if we think about a big foundation model, the cost to train this model is going to increase as the number of parameters increases. So this is primarily what we're focusing in on. And some really cool research from Stanford, the Don Bench group, suggesting that in 2017, it may cost close to $10,000 to train a sufficiently performant model on the ImageNet dataset. And achieving that same result in 2021 costs about $5. So just a remarkable decrease in training costs, and we see something similar for inferencing costs. So if we're thinking about what are some of the likely factors for this unappealing return on AI machine learning investments, at least we're seeing this cost curve get squished down quite remarkably. So it suggests that maybe we ought to look at other areas rather than simply just costs. I recognize that training costs and inferencing costs certainly aren't the only cost driver in the equation here, but it's suggestive of maybe there are other things to look at. Okay, so what might those other things be? So looking here at some research from Deloitte, we're saying if you can imagine you're just starting off your AI machine learning portfolio, you're just trying to kick it off, 30% of the respondents said that the most challenging thing that they had to overcome was just proving AI's business value to their executive teams. And this was the number one cited issue. So just to get started, just proving that AI business value is the most challenging thing. Once you've got 3 or 4 use cases up and running and you're looking to scale beyond that, there's a different set of key factors that were highlighted, including maintaining executive buy-in. Respondents cited that as a top challenge. And then another interesting one was identifying use cases with the greatest business value. So for me, these things sort of tend to gel together. You see a tremendous amount of strategic investment in AI machine learning, yet you see a relatively modest return on investment for those investments in AI. And that just makes it challenging to maintain some executive buy-in. It also highlights that maybe there are some challenges internally identifying use cases with meaningful business value. And it can also mean that it's hard to get started. So these things sort of seem to gel from my perspective. And so I think the key question is, what does your AI machine learning program or portfolio look like? On the right-hand side, I think this research suggests that it's very challenging for us to know what the AI machine learning portfolio looks like generally. And it's really hard to maybe assess when a new use case is coming up, where it's likely to fall on this hurdle rate. Is it more likely to be on the right-hand side in the positive area, or is it more likely to be on the left-hand side in the negative area? So these are some big challenges that I think are kind of present in the space at the moment. So if we can take a step back, I think thinking about our key persona, or maybe our chief financial officer or business sponsor, sometimes it can be really helpful if you go look at an extreme example or an edge case. So let's imagine our CFO is sort of parachuted in on a really large sustainable energy project, like a big wind farm. How might she behave in this scenario? What tools would she have at her disposal? What information would she be consuming? Let's try to dig into, what a day in the life looks like for her when she's working on this big investment project. So if she were embarking on this project, I think you'd probably see something similar to what we've got here on the right-hand side. So they'd be pretty closely trying to forecast out what they expect this wind farm might generate in terms of revenue. Lots of forecasting work would go on there, scrutinizing trends in electricity consumption and costs and things like that. They'd also look at operating expenditures. How expensive is it to maintain and maybe operate this wind farm? Also look at how much money do they need to expend up front in order to stand up this wind farm. All of these things kind of boil down into net present value, and then that will be converted into internal rate of return. So if maybe I know there's a lot of like financial jargon, so folks may not be necessarily familiar or comfortable with this, but if you're an AI machine learning practitioner, imagine your favorite model performance benchmark, maybe R squared or F1 or perplexity. This internal rate of return is, it's likely one of your CFO's top 3 favorite performance benchmarks. So it's something that they're going to use to assess the performance of projects and whether or not they want to make an investment in there. So taking this sort of extreme example for our CFOs, what might we carry over into the AI machine learning space? So imagine now that it's your CFO or your business sponsor, and they're considering an AI-powered solution that your team is building, and that's going to generate investment insights, maybe for your sales and trading team, your equity analysts, based on industry reports and public filings. The team spends a ton of time on this at the moment, so having some sort of AI-assisted solution here seems like it could be particularly valuable. So what might your business sponsor or your CFO kind of expect in this case? If we borrow from that prior framework, maybe there's some sort of business value, not necessarily revenue. I think in AI machine learning, it's pretty common to see use cases that kind of map to cost avoidance or risk reduction or revenue in some instances as well. But we can boil that down to business value. I think that seems like a good analogy for our AI machine learning framework here. Operating costs, these may include things like inferencing, model monitoring, and maintenance costs. So pretty analogous to our wind farm piece, our example earlier. Development costs, certainly resources have to be invested in order to get this AI-powered solution off the ground. And then those things ought to be able to be combined into something similar to a net present value and an internal rate of return. So just highlighting that this framework seems to work relatively well for AI machine learning use cases as well. If it happens to be something that our executive sponsors and CFOs are already comfortable with, how might we as AI practitioners sort of kind of rise to this level and help kind of speak their language, I suppose. And I'll pause here because this is where I think data-centric AI and programmatic labeling really kind of come into the picture here. If you've been joining the rest of the conference, I'm sure you're very familiar with some of the tools of the trade and data-centric AI and programmatic labeling. So to me, if you have let's see, in the old world where you had to invest so much time and effort in order to get a high quality labeled or annotated data set, you really couldn't afford to do really much more than the minimum to train a relatively performant model. Now with data-centric AI and programmatic labeling, you can get a whole history of high quality data that's labeled and annotated sufficiently for your use case. And I think this is important because it helps us really dig into this top line here, business value. For most of our AI and ML powered use cases, or I should say maybe for a meaningful number of them, they're deriving business value based on their predictive power. And so a key question, if we're thinking in this framework, is how does that predictive power deteriorate or depreciate over time? Or if you want to maybe put it another way, how durable is this AI machine learning use case? Without data-centric AI and programmatic labeling, we really don't have a great tool to help us answer that question because it's so painful for us to get high quality labeled data sets that it's just infeasible to get a much longer history that you might need to assess the durability or the kind of depreciation of that predictive power for that particular solution. So really excited about data-centric AI and programmatic labeling and how it can help us address this particular need of assessing AI machine learning durability. But there's also another piece to highlight here, which is also, I think, equally important, and that's the development cost line. So again, prior to the data-centric AI kind of movement, you had to sink in a tremendous amount of resources in order to figure out whether or not a use case was likely going to have good business value. And with data-centric AI and programmatic labeling, that has changed quite a bit. So you can pretty quickly do some light exploration at pretty minimal cost to see if your use case can deliver meaningful ROI. So if we think back to that wind farm example, your CFO and executive team is certainly looking for opportunities to delay or defer large capital expenditures. And although maybe one particular AI use case isn't at that scale of capital investment, the principle is still very relevant. The quicker a more efficiently or cost effectively that you can explore and validate or qualify an AI use case, you can find out if it does have an attractive ROI profile and kind of double down, or importantly, if it looks like it may have a modest ROI or negative ROI, you can sort of pull the plug early and reallocate those resources to the next project and move on. So I'm hoping that we sufficiently set up this challenge and the kind of conundrum where we see tons of investment in AI machine learning, although we see maybe a less than appealing ROI so far, and how we think data-centric AI can help us in this really critical area of assessing AI machine learning durability or maybe depreciation of predictive power, and how that in turn helps us improve the ROI profile of AI machine learning, ultimately leading to broader adoption. And if you're an AI machine learning practitioner, that means more AI powered solutions that you're able to deploy and launch. If you're an executive sponsor, that means your AI transformation program is picking up steam and contributing meaningfully to business outcomes. So thank you very much for your sort of time and attention. I appreciate the opportunity to share some what I think are particularly compelling features of data-centric AI and programmatic labeling.
Thank you so much, Max. That was a really exciting talk motivated by real-world problems and applications. We have some questions rolling in here, so I'll pose those to you. The first is about this framework that you're explaining about how to prove value. The question is, the theory of this framework makes a lot of sense. In application, what difficulties pop up with trying to use this framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard to get real solid information on what you expect the business value to be. So at some level, you do have to be prepared to work in ambiguous situations and make assumptions. I think as an AI practitioner, it's particularly important to work very closely with your, the business team or the domain experts in the area that you're working in, so that those assumptions are well vetted. And at least internally, if you and your business sponsors are on the same page with what assumptions you've made, at least you're kind of making that leap together. I think oftentimes what can happen is that those assumptions are relatively opaque. And so then people are surprised when maybe a use case is underwhelming. So being transparent, working really closely with your business partners, and accepting the fact that you're going to have to work in some ambiguous circumstances. I think in practice, I think those are some keys that I would suggest.
That's great advice. Thank you. Another question that ties very similar to that is about calculating this business value. And you mentioned that it can be ambiguous and difficult. And this question is specifically, what is your recommended approach to calculating that when the use case is in the birthing phase?
Yeah, so, some use cases, I think it's not necessarily, this framework doesn't necessarily apply to every use case. I think it's particularly powerful for use cases where predictive power is kind of the key driver for business value. And ultimately, I think doing some prototyping with your business partners early on, so you can understand what those key drivers might be, and then kind of working backwards from there is a good approach.
That makes sense. All right, I think we have time for one last question. This is, how much of data changes can happen with the hidden needs coming in with time? Any words of wisdom on changing data or changing problem definitions?
Yeah, this happens in some areas quite a bit. Just as an example, in fraudsters are always changing their tactics and their approaches So I'd say the half-life of that data is particularly small, or particularly short, I should say. So that certainly represents a problem. But then in other areas, it's less of maybe like almost like a competitive dynamic and more of an internal dynamic where maybe the business priorities have shifted a bit, which happens all the time. And so your ability to react with some agility and kind of pivot to meet the business needs where they are headed is super important. I think from the programmatic labeling standpoint, that's an area that is particularly important. Just allowing and enabling your teams, your AI practitioners, to kind of keep up despite some changing business priorities is great.
Thank you. I love that idea of agility. Very important with these changing needs.